I'm Marcus, 26 years old, and 3 weeks ago I inherited $3.8 million from my grandfather William. Yesterday, my biological parents showed up at the lawyer's office claiming they deserved half of everything. These are the same people who abandoned me when I was 11 years old and disappeared completely. The look on their faces when my grandfather's final letter was read aloud will haunt me forever. Before I dive into this insane story, let me know in the comments what state you're watching from. Hit that upvote if you've ever dealt with family members who only show up when money is involved. And follow our community for more unbelievable family drama stories. My childhood in Portland, Oregon was picture perfect until it wasn't. Mom worked as a nurse at OHSU, Dad managed a local sporting goods store, and we lived in a cozy craftsman house with a white picket fence in the Hawthorne district. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Summer evenings were spent playing catch in our small backyard. Christmas mornings overflowed with handmade gifts and hot cocoa. But there were warning signs I was too young to interpret, hushed arguments behind their bedroom door that grew longer and more frequent, Mom's sudden mood swings that could turn our cheerful breakfast into silent tension, Dad's mysterious weekend trips that he claimed were for work but left him smelling like cheap perfume and cigarettes. The real problems started when Dad's younger brother Jake died in a motorcycle accident. Dad inherited Jake's debts along with his vintage Harley, which Dad refused to sell despite our tight finances. That bike represented his lost youth, his freedom, everything he felt trapped by in suburban family life. Soon, he was spending entire weekends at motorcycle rallies, leaving Mom to handle everything alone. Mom began working double shifts to cover Dad's mounting expenses. The exhaustion changed her. She stopped cooking elaborate dinners, stopped asking about my homework, stopped tucking me in at night. She would come home and collapse on the couch with a glass of wine that became 2 glasses, then 3. When I tried to tell her about my day, she would stare at me like she was looking through fog. Dad's midlife crisis escalated when he quit his stable job to open a motorcycle repair shop with money we didn't have. The shop struggled from day one. Dad knew nothing about running a business, and his partner disappeared with half their startup capital within 6 months. The bills piled up while Dad spent his days tinkering with bikes that would never run properly. I tried desperately to be perfect. I maintained straight A's without help, learned to do my own laundry, and never complained when dinner was cereal again. I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they would remember they loved me. I didn't understand that their problems had nothing to do with my behavior. The night before they left, I overheard a phone conversation that should have prepared me, but didn't. Dad was talking to someone about starting fresh and cutting ties with everything holding us back. Mom was crying in the kitchen, and when I asked if she was okay, she pulled me into a fierce hug and whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over. I thought she was apologizing for dinner being late. I woke up that Tuesday morning in November to absolute silence. No shower running, no coffee brewing, no morning news playing softly in the background. The house felt hollow in a way that made my skin crawl. Their bedroom door stood wide open, revealing empty closets and bare dresser tops. My heart started racing as I ran from room to room, calling their names. On the kitchen counter, weighted down by a coffee mug I had made in 3rd grade pottery class, was a single sheet of notebook paper with my mother's handwriting. "Marcus, we can't do this anymore. Your grandfather will take care of you. We're sorry. Love, Mom and Dad." 13 words. 11 years of being their son reduced to 13 words. I called Mom's cell phone 57 times that day. Each call went straight to voicemail. Dad's phone had already been disconnected. I searched through their abandoned belongings, hoping to find some clue about where they had gone or when they might return. All I found were unpaid bills and empty picture frames. I had met my grandfather William exactly 3 times in my life. He was Dad's father, a retired aerospace engineer who lived in Seattle. Dad always described him as cold and judgmental, someone who disapproved of Dad's choices and never offered help when they needed it. The few conversations I remembered were stilted and awkward, with Grandpa asking formal questions about school while Dad fidgeted nearby. I spent 2 days alone in that house, surviving on peanut butter sandwiches and hope that they would come back with an explanation. On the 3rd day, a neighbor noticed newspapers piling up and called the police. The social worker, Mrs. Rodriguez, had kind eyes and a gentle voice, but her questions made everything terrifyingly real. "When did you last see your parents? Do you have any other family? Is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight?" Mrs. Rodriguez somehow located Grandpa William in Seattle. I sat in her office, stomach churning, as she explained the situation over the phone. "Mr. Patterson, your son and daughter-in-law have abandoned their child." "Yes, completely. Marcus has been alone for 3 days. The alternatives are foster placement or..." A long pause. "I understand this is sudden, but he's your grandson. He has no one else." Grandpa arrived the next morning in a pristine silver Mercedes that looked alien on our modest street. He wore a navy wool coat and leather gloves, his white hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. His expression when he saw me wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was determined, like he was accepting a difficult but necessary responsibility. "Pack what you need," he said simply. "We'll arrange for the rest later." The 3-hour drive to Seattle was mostly silent. Grandpa asked if I was hungry or needed to stop, but didn't push conversation. I stared out the window, watching Oregon disappear into Washington, feeling like I was traveling to another planet. When we finally pulled into his driveway in the Madison Park neighborhood, I understood why Dad had always felt inadequate. Grandpa's house was a modernist masterpiece perched on a bluff overlooking Lake Washington. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. My muddy sneakers felt criminal on his polished hardwood floors. This was a house designed for quiet contemplation, not an 11-year-old boy who collected baseball cards and left Lego pieces everywhere. The guest room where Grandpa installed me was larger than my parents' entire bedroom. It had its own bathroom with marble countertops and a shower that felt like standing in a warm rainstorm. The bed was so large I felt lost in it. That first night, I lay awake missing the familiar sounds of our old house. The neighbor's dog barking, traffic on Hawthorne Boulevard, the comforting creaks and sighs of settling wood. Grandpa's rules were numerous and non-negotiable. Breakfast at 7:30, sharp. Homework completed at the dining room table, not in front of the television. 1 hour of reading before bed, no exceptions. Chores assigned and completed without reminders. Respect for property, both his and others. No running in the house, no loud music, no friends over without advance permission. I rebelled initially, testing boundaries I hoped he would enforce with warmth instead of cold discipline. I tracked mud through his pristine house, left my belongings scattered around, forgot to complete assignments. But Grandpa never lost his temper or threatened to send me away. Instead, each infraction came with logical consequences delivered in his calm, measured voice. "You chose not to clean your room, so you've chosen not to watch television tonight. Tomorrow, you can make a different choice. You left your bicycle in the driveway, so you've chosen not to ride it this weekend. We'll try again next week." His consistency was both frustrating and oddly comforting. Unlike my parents, whose moods and expectations shifted like weather, Grandpa was predictable. If I followed the rules, life proceeded smoothly. If I didn't, consequences followed as surely as sunrise. The legal guardianship process was handled efficiently by Grandpa's attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, who treated everything like a complex engineering problem to be solved. My parents never appeared for any court dates. Attempts to contact them failed completely. It was as if they had vanished from existence, leaving only unpaid debts and a confused child behind. Grandpa enrolled me at Lakeside School, the same private academy where Bill Gates had studied. The academic standards were brutal compared to my Portland public school. I struggled with advanced mathematics and science courses that assumed knowledge I had never acquired. Instead of lowering expectations, Grandpa hired tutors and expected me to rise to meet the challenge. "Excellence is not a talent," he would say during our brief dinner conversations. "It's a habit developed through consistent effort. Your circumstances have changed, but your potential remains unlimited." Those early months were the loneliest of my life. My classmates came from wealthy families with complicated social hierarchies I didn't understand. They spoke casually about ski trips to Aspen and summer houses in the Hamptons. I ate lunch alone, spent recess reading in the library, and went home to a grandfather who provided everything except emotional warmth. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. My grades improved as my study habits solidified. I made a few tentative friendships with other scholarship students who also felt like outsiders. Grandpa began asking more specific questions about my day, listening to my responses with genuine attention. Our dinner conversations evolved from silence punctuated by etiquette corrections to actual discussions about current events and ideas. The breakthrough came during my freshman year when I discovered Grandpa's workshop in the basement. It was filled with partially completed engineering projects. A self-watering garden system, a solar-powered weather station, mechanical puzzles that required precise assembly. When he found me examining a complex gear system, I expected to be scolded for touching his things without permission. Instead, he sat beside me and began explaining how the mechanism worked. His voice changed when he talked about engineering challenges, becoming animated in a way I had never witnessed. For the first time, I saw passion behind his controlled exterior. "Would you like to help me finish this?" he asked. That simple question opened a door between us that had been locked since my arrival. We began spending evenings in the workshop, working on projects that combined his engineering expertise with my youthful curiosity. He taught me to solder circuits, read technical drawings, and approach problems with systematic analysis. These collaborative hours became the foundation of our relationship. Grandpa never spoke badly about my parents, but he didn't pretend their abandonment was acceptable either. When I asked why they had left, he gave me honest answers without false comfort. "Your father struggled with responsibility from childhood." He explained one evening as we calibrated a digital thermometer. Some people run from difficult situations instead of working through them. That choice reflects their character, not your worth. But why didn't they love me enough to stay? I asked, the question that haunted my quietest moments. Grandpa set down his tools and looked at me directly. Love isn't a feeling, Marcus. It's a commitment demonstrated through actions over time. Your parents may have felt love, but they failed to commit to the responsibility love requires. That failure belongs to them, not you. His blunt wisdom was more healing than any gentle reassurance could have been. Grandpa didn't deal in false comfort or empty promises. He dealt in truth, and truth could be trusted. High school brought new challenges as I navigated typical teenage struggles while living with a grandfather whose parenting style resembled military discipline more than modern child rearing. When I wanted to stay out late with friends, Grandpa required detailed itineraries and contact information. When I expressed interest in a girl, he sat me down for an uncomfortable but thorough discussion about respect and responsibility. When I got my driver's license, he made me complete a defensive driving course before touching his car keys. But beneath his strict exterior, I began recognizing genuine care. When I caught the flu, he checked on me every few hours despite his fear of germs. When I made varsity tennis, he attended every match, sitting quietly in the stands with a thermos of coffee. When I struggled with advanced calculus, he spent his evenings reviewing problems with me until the concepts clicked. Our relationship wasn't warm in any conventional sense, but it was solid, dependable, and built on mutual respect. Grandpa taught me that love could be expressed through consistency, high expectations, and unwavering support rather than constant affection and praise. College applications brought our first real conflict. I wanted to attend University of Oregon, partly for their strong business program, but mostly because it felt like returning home. Grandpa pushed for MIT or Stanford, schools that matched my academic achievements and his ambitions for my future. You're choosing familiarity over opportunity, he argued during one tense dinner conversation. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Maybe I don't want to grow into someone who chooses achievement over relationships, I shot back, immediately regretting my words. Grandpa set down his fork and studied me carefully. Is that what you think I've done? You live alone in this perfect house with your perfect things and your perfect schedule, I said, the words tumbling out despite my better judgment. Where are your friends? Where are the people who love you? What's the point of all this success if you have no one to share it with? I expected anger, but Grandpa just nodded slowly. You're not entirely wrong, he admitted. I chose professional achievement over personal relationships. I was impatient with your father's emotional needs, critical of his mistakes, absent when he needed guidance. My commitment to excellence became an excuse for avoiding the messy work of human connection. This unexpected vulnerability changed everything between us. For the first time, I saw my grandfather as a human being with regrets rather than an imposing authority figure. But I've learned something in these years with you, he continued. Excellence without love is hollow. Love without excellence is meaningless. The goal is finding balance between the two. We compromised on USC, a school with excellent academics and reasonable distance from Seattle. Grandpa paid the tuition without complaint, though I knew it represented a significant expense, even for him. He drove me to campus personally, helping me move into the dorms with characteristic efficiency. As he prepared to leave, Grandpa handed me a sealed envelope. Open this when you doubt yourself, he said simply. Remember that success is measured not by what you achieve, but by how you treat the people who depend on you. College opened new worlds of possibility. I studied business and engineering, combining Grandpa's analytical approach with my own interests in human psychology and market dynamics. I made close friends, dated seriously for the first time, and discovered talents I never knew I possessed. But through everything, I maintained weekly phone calls with Grandpa, sharing my experiences and seeking his counsel. Those conversations evolved into genuine friendship. Grandpa's advice became less authoritative and more collaborative. He shared stories about his own college experiences, his early career struggles, and even his regrets about his relationship with my father. I began understanding him as a complex person rather than just my guardian. During my junior year, Grandpa was diagnosed with heart disease. The doctors recommended surgery, but his age made the procedure risky. For the first time since I had known him, Grandpa seemed uncertain, vulnerable in a way that frightened me. I flew home immediately, despite his protests that I shouldn't miss classes for medical appointments. In the hospital waiting room, as we prepared for his surgery, Grandpa gripped my hand with surprising strength. If something happens, he began. Nothing will happen, I interrupted. If something happens, he continued firmly. Remember that taking you in was the best decision of my life. You taught an old man that precision and warmth aren't mutually exclusive. The surgery was successful, but Grandpa's recovery was slow and difficult. I spent that summer at home, helping with his rehabilitation and learning to manage his business affairs. Our roles gradually reversed as I became the caretaker and he became dependent on my assistance. During his recovery, Grandpa shared stories about his past that he had never mentioned before. His difficult childhood with demanding parents. His struggles to build his engineering firm from nothing. His failed marriage to a woman who couldn't tolerate his perfectionist tendencies. The growing distance from my father as career demands consumed his attention. I was so focused on providing financial stability that I forgot to provide emotional security, he admitted one afternoon as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle together. Your father needed a father, not a business mentor. By the time I realized my mistake, he had already learned to look for validation in all the wrong places. These conversations helped me understand both my grandfather and my father more completely. Dad's abandonment hadn't emerged from nowhere. It was the culmination of years of feeling inadequate compared to his accomplished, distant father. That understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it provided context that made the whole situation less personal. After graduation, I moved back to Seattle to help manage Grandpa's affairs and consider my own career options. His health had stabilized, but the scare had reminded us both that our time together wasn't unlimited. We developed new routines that accommodated his limitations while maintaining his independence. I started a small consulting firm, helping family businesses navigate succession planning and organizational challenges. The work combined my business education with hard-won insights about family dynamics. Grandpa served as my unofficial advisor, reviewing proposals and offering strategic guidance. Our relationship deepened during this period. The formal distance that had characterized my teenage years gradually gave way to genuine affection. Grandpa would never be the warm, demonstrative grandfather from heartwarming movies, but his quiet pride in my accomplishments and his subtle expressions of care meant more to me than any grand gestures could have. 2 years ago, Grandpa's health began declining more rapidly. He developed complications from his heart condition that required frequent hospitalizations and increasingly complex medical management. I took on more responsibilities for his care while continuing to run my business. During one particularly difficult hospitalization, Grandpa called me to his bedside with unusual urgency. "I need to tell you something about your parents," he said, his voice weaker than usual. He reached into his bedside table and withdrew a manila folder I had never seen before. Inside were letters, emails, and documents spanning the past 15 years. My hands shook as I realized what I was looking at. "They've been in contact with me periodically," Grandpa explained, "asking for money, claiming they wanted to rebuild their relationship with you, making various demands and threats. The earliest letter was dated just 6 months after they had abandoned me. My father wrote requesting $25,000 to get back on his feet so he could provide a proper home for Marcus again. The letter was full of justifications about temporary setbacks and promises about future stability. Subsequent communications followed a predictable pattern. Every few years, my parents would reach out with new financial crises that required immediate assistance. My mother's supposed medical emergency. Dad's business opportunity that just needed startup capital. Their claim that they were being evicted and needed help with rent. I investigated every claim, Grandpa said as I read through the documents. They were all fabrications designed to extract money. Your mother was never sick. Your father's business opportunities were non-existent. They were living off various schemes and temporary jobs while spending money on things like casino trips and luxury items they couldn't afford. The most disturbing documents were recent emails where my parents had somehow learned about my success with the consulting firm. They claimed they deserved credit for my achievements and demanded what they called their fair share of my income as compensation for giving me life and a good foundation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, overwhelmed by this hidden history. "You were healing," Grandpa replied simply. "You had built a life based on your own efforts and my support. I didn't want their dysfunction to contaminate that progress. But now that my health is failing, you need to know what they're capable of." He handed me another document from his attorney. "I've taken legal precautions to protect you after I'm gone. Your parents will likely surface again when they learn about my death. They'll claim reconciliation is possible, that they've changed, that they deserve another chance. You'll want to believe them because you're a good person with a generous heart. Don't." 6 months later, Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep. I found him that morning in his favorite chair, overlooking Lake Washington, with a book about sustainable engineering open in his lap. His death was sudden but not unexpected. His doctor had warned us that his heart could fail at any time. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by former colleagues, business associates, and the handful of neighbors who had known him for decades. As I delivered the eulogy, I struggled to capture the complexity of our relationship. He had saved me, shaped me, and loved me in his own precise, unwavering way. He was the father I had needed, even if he had never intended to become one. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. Grandpa's attorney, Robert Chen, had served as his legal counsel for over 20 years and knew every detail of his carefully planned estate. I arrived at Chen's downtown office expecting a straightforward transfer of assets and responsibilities. Chen greeted me warmly, expressing condolences and reviewing the basic structure of Grandpa's will. The house, investment accounts, business assets, and personal property all passed to me, totaling nearly $4 million. It was more wealth than I had ever imagined, enough to ensure financial security for life. However, Chen said, opening another file, your grandfather anticipated that others might appear to contest these arrangements. He left specific instructions for that contingency. Before I could ask what he meant, Chen's secretary announced that 2 people were waiting to join our meeting. My stomach dropped as Chen confirmed my worst fear. Your parents requested to be present for the will reading. They claimed to have reconciliation intentions, but your grandfather suspected their motivations would be financial. The door opened and my parents entered the conference room. 15 years had aged them dramatically. Dad's hair was completely gray and thinning, his face lined and weathered. He had gained considerable weight and moved with the careful gait of someone experiencing chronic pain. Mom looked frail and tired, her once vibrant energy replaced by nervous restlessness. They both wore clothes that were clean but clearly inexpensive, and they carried themselves with the diminished confidence of people who had made too many mistakes. Marcus, Dad said, his voice rougher than I remembered. Son, you've grown into such a fine man. Mom approached me hesitantly, as if unsure whether I would accept an embrace. We've missed you so much, sweetheart. We've thought about you every single day. I remained seated, unable to process their sudden presence. After 15 years of absence, they had materialized in this conference room like characters from a half-remembered dream. How did you know about this meeting? I managed to ask. We saw your grandfather's obituary in the Seattle Times, Mom explained. We've been keeping track of the family over the years, hoping for the right time to reconnect. The right time, I repeated slowly. And that time happened to be immediately after my grandfather died? Dad shifted uncomfortably. We didn't want to interfere with your relationship with him. We knew he disapproved of us, and we didn't want to create conflict for you. Chen cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should proceed with the formal reading, and then you can have time to talk privately. As Chen reviewed the will's provisions, I watched my parents' expressions carefully. When he mentioned the house's value, Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. When he detailed the investment accounts, Mom leaned forward with increased attention. When he reached the total estate value of nearly $4 million, they exchanged a quick glance that confirmed every suspicion Grandpa had shared. Of course, we're so proud of everything you've accomplished, Mom said when Chen finished reading. And we're grateful to William for providing such wonderful opportunities. It must be overwhelming to handle such responsibility alone. Fortunately, Dad added, as your parents, we're in a position to help you navigate these complex financial waters. We've learned a lot about money management over the years. I almost laughed at the irony. These were the people who had abandoned me because they couldn't manage their own finances, now offering to help me manage millions. We were thinking, Mom continued, that it might be appropriate to share these assets among the family. After all, William was your father's father originally. There's a family connection to this wealth that goes beyond just you. Chen opened another file. Actually, that brings us to the secondary provisions of the will. Mr. Patterson anticipated this exact scenario and left specific instructions. He handed me a sealed envelope marked with my name in Grandpa's precise handwriting. Your grandfather requested that this letter be read aloud if your parents appeared to claim any portion of your inheritance. I broke the seal with trembling hands and unfolded several pages of Grandpa's careful script. My voice shook as I began reading aloud. My dear Marcus, if you are reading this letter in the presence of your biological parents, it means they have arrived seeking access to the wealth I am leaving you. This is not a coincidence. Their timing confirms everything I have long suspected about their motivations. Over the past 15 years, your parents have contacted me repeatedly requesting money. They have fabricated medical emergencies, invented business opportunities, and created fictional crises, all designed to extract financial support. I have documentation of every attempt, including their recent demands for what they called their rightful share of your success. Dad's face had gone pale. Mom was staring at the table, no longer making eye contact. I continued reading. 6 months ago, your father called, claiming he had cancer and needed $50,000 for treatment. When I demanded medical records, he became abusive and threatened to tell Marcus the truth about what kind of man you really are. Your mother sent emails claiming they were homeless and desperate, living in their car and eating at soup kitchens. My private investigator confirmed they were living comfortably in a Las Vegas apartment and frequenting casinos regularly. This is ridiculous, Dad interrupted, his composure cracking. Those were misunderstandings. We were going through difficult times. The most recent contact came just 3 months ago, I read, my voice growing stronger. They somehow obtained information about my health decline and your business success. They demanded I include them in my will, claiming they deserved compensation for sacrificing their parental rights to give you a better life. They suggested that $1 million would be appropriate recognition for their sacrifice. Mom was crying now, but they seemed like tears of frustration rather than genuine remorse. I want you to understand, Marcus, that family loyalty is not owed to people who abandon their responsibilities and then return seeking rewards. The parents you might have wanted them to be do not exist. The people sitting in that room are strangers who share your DNA, but not your values or character. The final page contained Grandpa's most devastating revelation. I have had your parents investigated annually since they first contacted me. They have been involved in multiple financial schemes, including insurance fraud, welfare fraud, and identity theft. Your father has 2 additional children with different women, both of whom he has also abandoned. Your mother was arrested twice for shoplifting and once for attempting to use a stolen credit card. These are not people who made a single mistake and learned from it. These are people who have made abandonment and deception their lifestyle. I looked up to see my parents' faces completely drained of color. The room was silent except for the sound of my mother's quiet sobbing. Chen spoke into the silence. Mr. Patterson also left these documents for your review. He pushed across the table a thick folder containing photographs, police reports, credit checks, and detailed timelines of my parents' activities over the past 15 years. This can't all be true, Mom whispered. William hired investigators to spy on us? He hired investigators to protect Marcus from exactly this scenario, Chen replied firmly. Everything in that file is documented and verifiable. Dad's shock was transforming into anger. That controlling old bastard couldn't stand that we were Marcus's real parents. He turned you against us before we even had a chance. You turned me against you when you abandoned me, I said, my own anger finally surfacing. Grandpa didn't need to poison me against you. You did that yourselves by disappearing for 15 years and then showing up here asking for money. We're not asking for money, Mom protested weakly. We just want to be a family again. Really? I opened the investigator's file and pulled out printed emails. Then explain this message you sent to Grandpa last month. That boy owes us everything. We gave him life, and we deserve to benefit from his success. $1 million is nothing compared to what we sacrificed. The confrontation continued for another hour, with my parents alternating between denials, justifications, and increasingly desperate appeals to family loyalty. They claimed the investigation was biased, that Grandpa had manipulated the evidence, that they had been planning to contact me independently of his death. But their story kept changing. Their timeline didn't align, and their financial requests became more explicit as their cover story collapsed. By the end, they were openly demanding what they called their fair share of an inheritance they insisted should be considered family money rather than individual property. Chen finally ended the meeting by presenting them with cease and desist documents. Mr. Patterson's will includes provisions for legal action if you continue to harass Marcus or make false claims about the estate. Any further contact should be directed through my office. As my parents prepared to leave, Dad made one final attempt at manipulation. You're going to regret this, Marcus. Family is all you really have in this world. Money won't love you back when you're old and alone. Grandpa loved me back, I replied. He showed up every day for 15 years. He earned the right to be called family. You showed up when there was money involved. That's called something else entirely. After they left, I sat in Chen's office trying to process what had just happened. The fantasy reunion I had occasionally imagined as a child bore no resemblance to this calculated attempt at financial manipulation. Your grandfather was a wise man, Chen said gently. He knew this day would come, and he prepared you for it as well as anyone could be prepared. That evening, I returned to Grandpa's house, my house now, and went through his files more carefully. I found additional documentation of my parents' activities, including evidence that they had attempted to contact my high school guidance counselor, claiming I was in danger and needed to be removed from Grandpa's care. They had also tried to access my college records, presumably to gather information about my academic and financial status. Most disturbing was a recorded phone conversation from 2 years ago where Dad threatened to create a social media campaign against Grandpa, claiming he had stolen me from my rightful parents and was brainwashing me against them. The recording captured Dad's exact words. That old man has poisoned my son's mind and stolen my inheritance. I'll destroy his reputation if he doesn't start sharing the wealth. 6 months have passed since that confrontation in Chen's office. My parents made several more attempts to contact me, each following a predictable pattern of emotional appeals followed by financial demands. When those failed, they hired an attorney to contest the will, claiming Grandpa had exercised undue influence over me as a minor. The legal challenge collapsed quickly when Chen presented the full scope of Grandpa's documentation. The judge was particularly unimpressed by their claim of wanting a family relationship while simultaneously demanding specific dollar amounts for emotional damages. Their attorney withdrew from the case after discovering my parents had misrepresented key facts about their history and their relationship with me. The judge issued a restraining order, preventing them from contacting me directly, and warned them that further frivolous legal action could result in sanctions. I've used a portion of my inheritance to establish the William Patterson Foundation for Youth Support, providing college scholarships and mentorship programs for children who have experienced family abandonment or instability. Working with these young people has helped me understand that my experience, while painful, led to remarkable opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The Foundation's first scholarship recipient is a 17-year-old girl whose single mother died when she was 14, leaving her to be raised by an elderly grandmother who worked 3 jobs to keep them housed. Her determination and academic excellence remind me of my own younger self, and watching her succeed feels like honoring Grandpa's memory in the most meaningful way possible. I still live in Grandpa's house, though I've made it more comfortable and less formal. The sterile perfection has given way to warmth without losing elegance. I've kept his workshop exactly as he left it, and I still go down there when I need to think or solve problems. Sometimes I can almost hear his voice explaining the logical approach to whatever challenge I'm facing. Last month, I received a letter from my father's second ex-wife, a woman I had never met. She wrote to warn me that my parents were planning another approach, having learned through mutual acquaintances that I had donated money to charity. They were constructing a story about their own charitable intentions, and hoped to convince me that supporting them would be equivalent to helping people in need. This letter confirmed what I had already suspected. My parents view me not as a son they lost and want to reconnect with, but as a resource they feel entitled to access. Their continued efforts to manipulate me, rather than simply expressing genuine remorse, proves that Grandpa's assessment of their character was accurate. I've found peace with the fact that some relationships cannot be repaired because they were never built on solid foundations in the first place. My parents provided genetic material and 11 years of inconsistent care, but they never learned to love through commitment and sacrifice. Grandpa showed me what real parental love looks like. Demanding, consistent, focused on the child's long-term growth rather than immediate gratification. The money they wanted so desperately has become a tool for creating the kind of stable, supportive relationships they never managed to build. Through the foundation, I'm helping other young people find mentorship and opportunity when their biological families fail them. It's the legacy Grandpa would have wanted, using privilege and resources to lift others rather than simply accumulating wealth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my parents had approached this situation differently. If they had come to the funeral to pay respects and express genuine sorrow for their absence from my life. If they had asked for forgiveness rather than money. If they had spent the past 15 years building character instead of developing schemes. But those questions belong to a fantasy version of my parents who never existed. The real version made their choices consistently over many years, and those choices revealed their true priorities. I've chosen to build my life around the values Grandpa taught me: integrity, consistency, and using success to create security for others rather than just yourself. Do you think DNA creates automatic family obligations, or does family status need to be earned through consistent care and support? Should people who abandon their responsibilities get second chances when money becomes available, or do actions have permanent consequences? I'd love to hear your perspectives in the comments. Update, posted 3 months later. Well, Reddit, you asked for updates, and unfortunately I have a doozy. Remember my biological parents who tried to claim half my inheritance? They're back, and this time they've brought reinforcements. Last Tuesday, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera Grandpa had installed, I saw a woman I didn't recognize standing on my porch with a young man who looked vaguely familiar. She was holding flowers and what appeared to be a casserole dish. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latch engaged. "Can I help you?" "Marcus? Oh my goodness, you look just like your father did at your age." The woman beamed at me with practiced warmth. "I'm Linda, your dad's sister from Phoenix. And this is your cousin Jake. We've driven all this way to finally meet you." My father had never mentioned having a sister, but then again, there were clearly many things about my father I didn't know. Jake appeared to be in his early 20s, with the same dark hair and green eyes that ran in our family. He smiled shyly and gave a small wave. "We heard about William's passing and felt terrible that we missed the funeral," Linda continued. "Family should stick together during difficult times. We brought dinner and were hoping we could come in and talk." Every instinct Grandpa had trained into me was screaming warnings, but I was curious enough to let them inside. Linda immediately began gushing over the house, making comments about the beautiful furnishings and asking detailed questions about square footage and property values. Jake seemed more genuinely interested in family history, asking about photos on the mantelpiece and whether I remembered specific relatives. Over dinner, Linda shared stories about growing up with my father that had enough accurate details to seem legitimate. She knew about his motorcycle phase, his failed business ventures, and even some childhood incidents that would be difficult to fabricate. Jake mostly listened, occasionally asking innocent questions about my work and my life since Grandpa's death. But something felt orchestrated about the entire visit. Linda's questions consistently steered toward financial topics. Was I planning to keep such a large house? Did I need help managing investments? Had I considered the tax implications of inheriting so much money? When I mentioned the foundation I'd started, her eyes lit up with particular interest. "Oh, how wonderful," she exclaimed. "You know, Jake here just graduated with a nonprofit management degree. He's been looking for exactly that kind of opportunity. Maybe you two could work together." Jake looked embarrassed by his mother's transparent networking attempt. "Mom, I'm sure Marcus has his own plans." But Linda was just getting started. Over the next hour, she painted a picture of her family's financial struggles. Her husband had been laid off from his construction job due to an injury. Jake's student loans were overwhelming despite his good grades. They were facing foreclosure on their modest home in Phoenix and had driven to Seattle as a last resort. "We're not asking for handouts," Linda insisted. "We just think family should help family when possible. Even a small loan would make such a difference for us." I asked specific questions about their situation, and their answers grew increasingly vague. The injury timeline didn't match. Jake's degree was supposedly from Arizona State, but he couldn't accurately describe the campus when I asked about specific buildings I knew from visiting friends there. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, I quickly called Chen on my cell phone and explained the situation. He promised to run background checks immediately and advised me to be polite but non-committal until we knew more. Returning to the living room, I found Linda examining Grandpa's collection of engineering awards, while Jake stood uncomfortably nearby. "These must be worth quite a bit," she commented casually. "William certainly accomplished a lot in his career." I decided to test them. "Yes, he was very proud of his work with Boeing on the 787 project." "Oh, the 787! Of course!" Linda nodded enthusiastically. Except Grandpa had never worked for Boeing. He'd been a private consultant who occasionally criticized their engineering decisions in industry publications. Anyone who actually knew him would have caught that error immediately. Chen called back within an hour with preliminary results. Linda Wilson was indeed from Phoenix, but she had no documented family connection to my father. Her husband was employed full-time at a plumbing company and had never been injured. Jake was 22 years old, but had never attended Arizona State or any other university. More disturbing was their travel history. They had driven to Seattle immediately after my parents' failed legal challenge to the will. Hotel records showed they'd been in the city for 3 days before appearing at my door, presumably conducting surveillance or planning their approach. "Linda," I said after ending Chen's call, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding family helping family. It's interesting that you mentioned that concept, because I've recently learned a lot about who my real family actually is." Her smile flickered slightly. "Well, of course, blood is thicker than water." "Is it?" "Because my grandfather spent 15 years proving that commitment and consistency matter more than genetics, and my biological parents spent 15 years proving the opposite." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Marcus, maybe we should go. I don't think this was a good idea." But Linda wasn't ready to give up. "Now wait just a minute. We've come a long way to meet our nephew, and we deserve a chance to explain our situation." "Your nephew?" I repeated. "That's interesting, because according to the background check I just had run, you have no family connection to me whatsoever. You're not my father's sister. Jake isn't my cousin, and your husband isn't injured or unemployed." The mask slipped completely. Linda's warm demeanor vanished, replaced by cold calculation. You arrogant little bastard, just like your grandfather, thinking money makes you better than everyone else." "Actually, my grandfather taught me that character makes people better than money, and character is exactly what you're lacking." Jake looked genuinely shocked by his mother's transformation. "Mom, what is he talking about? You said we were visiting family." The truth came out in angry bursts. Linda had met my parents at a casino in Las Vegas where they'd been complaining about their ungrateful son, who'd inherited millions and refused to share. She'd convinced them to let her try a different approach, playing the role of long-lost family member to gain access where their direct attempts had failed. "You have more money than any one person deserves," Linda spat. "Your parents gave you life, and you owe them something for that. If they can't collect what's rightfully theirs, then someone should benefit from all that wealth just sitting there. So you decided that someone should be you? Why not? At least I'm honest about needing money instead of pretending to want some emotional reunion." I looked at Jake, who appeared mortified by his mother's confession. "Did you know about this plan?" He shook his head vigorously. "She told me we were visiting family who might be able to help with college expenses. I thought it was legitimate. Linda grabbed her son's arm. Don't you dare sympathize with him. He's sitting in a mansion worth millions, while working people like us struggle to survive. Working people don't usually conduct elaborate fraud schemes, I pointed out, and struggling families don't typically have money for cross-country surveillance trips. I called Chen, who immediately contacted the police. While we waited for officers to arrive, Linda alternated between threats and attempts at negotiation. She claimed she had evidence of my grandfather's illegal business practices. She threatened to contact media outlets with stories about my heartless treatment of desperate relatives. She offered to settle for a smaller amount if I would just be reasonable. Jake sat silently, clearly processing the reality that his mother had used him as a prop in a criminal scheme. When I offered him a glass of water, he apologized repeatedly for the deception. I really am struggling with student loans, he said quietly, but I earned a business degree from Phoenix Community College, not ASU, and I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay rent. She told me this was a legitimate family connection that might lead to networking opportunities. The police arrived and took statements from everyone. Linda was arrested for attempted fraud and criminal impersonation. Jake was questioned but released when it became clear he had been manipulated rather than actively participating in the scheme. Before the officers left, one of them asked if I wanted to press additional charges. We see this kind of thing sometimes with inheritance cases, he explained. Word gets out about someone receiving money, and suddenly they discover relatives they never knew they had. After everyone left, I sat in Grandpa's study, trying to process what had happened. This was the 3rd attempt by different people to access my inheritance through deception and manipulation. It was becoming clear that my parents had been sharing information about my situation with other desperate or opportunistic individuals. Chen came by the next morning with more disturbing news. His investigation had revealed that Linda was part of a loose network of people who specialized in inheritance fraud. They monitored obituaries and probate records, looking for recently wealthy individuals who might be vulnerable to family-based scams. Your parents have essentially been advertising your situation, Chen explained. They've told their story to multiple people in various locations, probably hoping someone would succeed where they failed. He handed me a folder containing evidence of at least 6 other individuals who had been making inquiries about me through various channels. A man claiming to be my father's military buddy who needed medical expense help. A woman insisting she was my mother's cousin who had fallen on hard times. An elderly couple claiming to be my grandparents on my mother's side who wanted to meet their only grandchild. This is going to continue, Chen warned. As long as your parents keep sharing your information and your financial status remains public knowledge through property records and business filings, you're going to attract these kinds of approaches. I made several decisions that day. First, I hired a private security company to monitor my property and screen visitors. Second, I moved my primary residence to a smaller, more secure property while keeping Grandpa's house for the foundation's headquarters. Third, I implemented strict privacy measures for all my business dealings. Most importantly, I contacted Jake separately to offer him legitimate help. Despite his mother's deception, he was a young person genuinely struggling with education costs and job prospects. I offered him an internship with the foundation, contingent on background verification and his willingness to testify against his mother if necessary. Jake accepted gratefully and has become one of our most dedicated employees. His experience being manipulated by someone he trusted gives him unique insight into helping young people who have been betrayed by family members. Sometimes, the best advocates are people who have lived through similar experiences. The legal proceedings against Linda are ongoing. She initially pled not guilty and claimed she genuinely believed she was related to me. But Chen's investigation uncovered evidence of similar schemes she had attempted in California and Nevada. She eventually accepted a plea deal that includes restitution and a mandate to stay away from me permanently. More troubling was discovering that my parents had provided Linda with personal information about my childhood, my relationship with Grandpa, and even details about the house layout that could only have come from someone who had been inside. This confirmed that their recent approaches weren't random desperation, but calculated campaigns involving multiple people. Chen filed additional restraining orders and worked with law enforcement to investigate whether my parents were receiving financial compensation for sharing my information. If they were profiting from these referrals, it could constitute conspiracy charges. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from a detective in Las Vegas. My parents had been arrested for running an investment scam targeting elderly casino patrons. They were convincing seniors to invest in a non-existent real estate development using fabricated documents and promising guaranteed returns. During their questioning, they mentioned having a wealthy son in Seattle who could potentially cover restitution if charges were reduced. Even from jail, they were still trying to monetize their connection to me. The detective asked if I wanted to provide a victim impact statement for their sentencing hearing. I declined. But I did provide Chen's contact information and authorization to share relevant documentation about their previous fraud attempts. I don't know what their sentences will be, but I'm finally free from the fear that they might succeed in one of their schemes. Their arrest for unrelated crimes has effectively ended their credibility and probably discouraged other potential scammers from working with them. The foundation is thriving despite all this drama. We've provided scholarships to 15 students and mentorship to dozens more. Several of our earliest recipients are now in college and staying in touch regularly. One young woman writes to me every month about her pre-med studies, sharing her excitement about eventually becoming a pediatrician. Working with these remarkable young people reminds me daily that family isn't about genetics or legal obligations. It's about people who choose to invest in each other's growth and success. The students I mentor through the foundation feel more like real family than my biological parents ever did. I've learned to recognize the warning signs of inheritance fraud and developed protocols for handling suspicious approaches. But more importantly, I've learned that generosity doesn't require naivety. I can help people while still protecting myself and the resources Grandpa entrusted to me. Recently, I've been in touch with some of Grandpa's former colleagues who knew him before I came to live with him. They've shared stories about how much he changed after I arrived, how he went from being a solitary workaholic to someone who talked proudly about his grandson's achievements. Those conversations have helped me understand that our relationship transformed both of us. One of his former business partners told me something that brought tears to my eyes. William used to say that Marcus taught him the difference between success and significance. Success was what he achieved for himself. Significance was what he helped you achieve for others. That's the legacy I want to honor, not the wealth itself, but the values behind it. The understanding that real power comes from lifting others up rather than accumulating resources for their own sake. I still miss Grandpa every day, but I'm grateful that his careful planning has protected me from the worst intentions of people who see inheritance as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. He knew exactly what he was doing when he documented everything and prepared me for these challenges. For anyone dealing with similar situations, trust your instincts, verify everything, and remember that real family members don't typically show up with financial demands and elaborate stories. The people who genuinely care about you will prove it through actions over time, not through dramatic appearances following significant life events. And to the various scammers who might be reading this, I'm well protected, well advised, and well prepared for your approaches. My grandfather's final gift wasn't just money. It was the wisdom to recognize the difference between genuine relationships and financial predators. Thanks for reading Reddit. I hope sharing my experience helps others navigate similar challenges. Family drama is hard enough without adding fraud to the mix.